Now, one of the most complicated aspects of the book was the fact that the foxes changed sex and dropped their legs off at the back, and depending on how many legs they had, that determined. And I know that some of the authors never quite got it figured out. Did you ever figure out how it worked?
As a matter of fact, it was the most complex part of the whole thing. I did a whole series of drawings analyzing the entire anatomical structure of the fox and how it would be possible to design the skeleton in such a way that it could drop parts from the rear and still continue to function. And in a couple of the pictures, there is shown the entire life cycle of the fox. And I made a particular point of including foxes at different stages of maturity in various illustrations as you go through the book.
In addition to all of the people who had worked on the specs and all of the people who had been there that evening, which totaled, I believe, 8, I did a poll throughout the entire range of science fiction readers and all, and I said, what writer would you like to see in this book? And the name that came out #1 was Jack Williamson. I then realized that all of the writers in the book were men, and I thought that that was a serious deficiency, and so I asked Kate Wilhelm to do a story. So those 2 people were added ex post facto. Or do I mean, yes, ex post facto.
But doesn't the addition of just a single female author, when perhaps it could have been more, doesn't that have a bit of a ring of boys' club to it?
That, if I may say, is, how shall I put that, politically correct thinking, and it's bullshit. Are you allowed to say bullshit on this program? I do hope so, because if not, you can bleep it, but my mouth is saying bullshit. Talent is not egalitarian. Freedom and equality, as Will and Ariel Durant said, freedom and equality are sworn and mutual enemies. Where one prospers, the other will founder. When you put together a group of writers, you pick the writers who do the job. At the time that I was picking the writers, there were a number of extraordinarily fine women writers in the field. On the other hand, most of them were not yet coming to fruition in their work, had not reached the peak. You couldn't spot who they were. The one I would have picked ordinarily would have been Ursula Le Guin. Ursula was not available. She was asked to be in the original group. She simply didn't make it. If it smacks of Boys Club, let it smack of Boys Club. The book stands on its own. The fact that after the fact, I was smart enough to say, no, we actually need a strong female viewpoint here, is more than enough bowing and scraping and tugging of the forelock. Beyond that, I say, screw them if they don't like my lineup.
Harlan called and said he was doing Medea's World, and he would like a story from me. And I was at that time working on the story that appeared in his shared world. I just had my creatures on a desert. I didn't have them in any particular world yet, because that always comes very late. I had an old teacher who finds the quest for knowledge and understanding worth any price she has to pay, and a young teacher who is learning that that is her quest to find knowledge. And it could just as well go on Harlan's world as anywhere else. So I said yes, and I had a ready-made background that I could put my story on.
Jack, how difficult was it coming in late on the Medea project?
Well, it really wasn't difficult at all. Most of the other stories had been written so that I had the background and spirit of the thing ready-made, and I happened to hit on an idea that seemed to work, so I felt very lucky to have been invited in, and my story turned out very well without much unexpected difficulty. I was very happy about the whole undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Did you see the incredible potential that the project had when Harlan first called you and told you about it?
Well, I was excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been involved in many such enterprises, and the other people involved were friends, writers whose creativity and skills I respected, and I just happened to fall into a fortunate spot, and I was delighted about it.
For my sins, I got to write the last story. The reason for this was that I was going through a phase when I didn't feel like writing at all. We did our original Medea seminar in 1975. I then proceeded to take the next 4 years off and do no writing. So when Harlan said to me, now you have to write your story, I said, no, I'm not writing now, and he felt betrayed by this. But the book was so long in the production that I had worked through my entire period of not writing. And finally, I went back to writing in 1979 or so, 80. And Harlan said, all right, you're writing again. Now you have to do it. What? I said, the book is still in the process. Yes. But of course, everybody else by then had written the story. So I was handed this enormous bale of manuscript. And I wrote a story in which I referred to each of the other 9. I took my character around the entire planet, stopping off at everybody else's location. Of course, I learned then of the internal inconsistencies that had been built into the book, but I had a lot of fun, and it was one of those glorious see what I can do stunts to close it all off that way.
It's odd that Harlan would pressure you when he took another 4 years to write the 11th Medea story.
Well, I had my revenge. Harlan did put the pressure on me, but he wrote his story at my house. He said, unless you lock me in the room and watch on me, I'll never get my story written. So he flew up. He lives in Los Angeles. I live near San Francisco. He flew up and he spent 3 or 4 days in my house confronting a typewriter, and I would get him hamburgers or whatever disgusting thing he wanted to eat. And every now and then he would emerge and he would say, because I knew the material of the seminar better than he did, he would emerge and say, Bob, how many fingers do they have? Or which pole is to the east? And I'd say, it's the east pole, that's to the east. And then he'd go back in and he'd type away some more, and he came out with the story 10 years in the making.
What do you think about the way shared worlds have gone since Medea? I mean, you started a mega industry.
Yes, well, if in fact what you're saying is true, and I am responsible in any way for the hideous abattoir that the field has become of shared world garbage, of plantation novels, of people writing sequels to stories that never deserved sequels, of people selling their talents down the line to make a buck, of publishers turning into plantation niggers, if I may use the exact proper politically incorrect quote, good writers who should be working on their own material instead of farming other people's land, then I should be shot dead like a rabid dog in the street. I like to think that I am not responsible for it, and I'll tell you very simply why. Before I did the shared world, Medea, there was a manifesto published by one of the French deconstructionist science fiction critics, whose name I cannot now remember, but it's in the book. And he said the whole field of science fiction should start using this one-ordered template. We should all agree that the world of the future would look like this, and we should all put our stories there. And there was a lot of serious attention paid to this guy for a few years. And I thought he was demented. I thought he should have been, you know, they should find Elba or some other nice place and send him there and let him raise petunias. When we did the book, I was seriously pilloried because the stories were not consistent, because they contradicted each other, because one of the stories, Tom Dish's story, seemed almost peripheral, that it was only in the book because it used the planet Medea. It had the name, but otherwise it could have taken place in Decatur, Georgia. I was pilloried for that. I, in my introduction, reveled in it. I said, yes. I said, when you are dealing with intellects this fecund and this antic, to hamstring them, to give them a rigor out of which they cannot break, is suicidal and stupid. And I said that this book should be a lesson that the more freedom, the better.
Robert Silverberg's story wrapped up Medea, but a few years later, at the 1988 Nebula Awards, he began another shared world, Murasaki. The book would be a fundraising project for SFWA, the Science Fiction Writers of America. To design Murasaki, Silverberg commissioned 2 of the Medea architects, the Venerable Pohl Anderson and Frederik Pohl. Well, every world needs 2 Pohls. As in Medea, they started with a real star, an unnamed red dwarf only 20 light-years from Earth. The star is christened Murasaki by the Japanese, who sent a robot probe to explore the system in the year 2219. The probe discovers a pair of planets, Genji and Chujo, with life on them. The Japanese immediately launch a manned expedition, but so do the spacers, the 1 billion or so humans who inhabit the thousands of space colonies that circle our sun. Each expedition arrives and claims a planet. Giant Genji, with its large oceans, titanic tides, and dense atmosphere, is home to 2 intelligent species, the newt-like Irdizu and underwater carpet whales, sort of an advanced dolphin. Chujo is dry, cold, and volcano-ridden. The only intelligent species are the humanoid shamans, their civilization in decline. The Japanese colonists on Genji are scientific rationalists. The spacers on Chujo are spiritualists. Call it science versus art. 2 planets, 4 intelligent species, and hundreds of different cultures.